Hi, in this video we're going to be talking about preloaded Windows SSD drives, which are drives you could buy online that already have Windows installed, and these are ready for you to plug in and boot up your computer with. So these drives are popular because they promise, things like fast setup, easy upgrade, or a quick fix for a dead computer. So the question is, are they really worth it? Are they safe? How does the activation work? And how do they come up with user accounts already configured, or do you need to set that up on your own? All right, so what exactly is a preloaded Windows 11 SSD? So it's a solid state drive that ships with Windows 11 already installed and configured. So sometimes vendors will do things such as install Windows updates, maybe add some drivers, and then what they'll do after that is clone these drives to hundreds of other drives. So obviously they're not going to do these individually when they're trying to sell, hundreds or thousands of them. All right, so the idea behind it's pretty simple. You install this new drive, you boot up your computer with it, you finish the Windows setup, and then you're ready to go. But the question is, how smooth of an experience is this going to be? And this is going to vary depending on the seller, of course. All right, so what are some of the benefits of buying a preloaded Windows SSD? So like I said, you have the instant setup. You don't have to download a Windows OS. You don't have to create a flash drive. You don't have to partition anything. You don't have to wait for the long Windows installation. So it's as close as a plug-and-play Windows operation as you could get. So this is good for dead or damaged PCs. So let's say your old drive died or Windows refuses to boot. This gives you a fresh OS in minutes, assuming, of course, the hard drive is the problem. And then with this, you could have a hardware upgrade and an OS fix at the same time. So you could have a new or larger or even faster SSD drive, fresh installation of Windows, and this should give you faster boot times and an overall performance boost. So this is good for users who don't want to take the time to learn how to install Windows, and also for repair shops that want a quick turnaround time. All right, so now let's talk about some disadvantages, risks, and potential problems with these pre-configured SSD drives. So obviously one of the big ones is your Windows activation may not transfer. So if you have an OEM key, the activation is going to be tied to the motherboard, not the SSD drive. So when you start your computer with this new drive, the activation may fail. So if that's the case and you own your own Microsoft key that's tied to your Microsoft account, you can get it that way. Enter your own product key in the Windows configuration, and you could do this by using the I change my hardware option to reactivate Windows on your computer. All right, so some things you need to worry about. We have unknown installation sources such as, was it installed legally? Did they use a genuine key if it is activated on their end? Was the image modified from a typical Windows installation? And you really have no way of knowing unless you really know what to look for. And then of course you run into the situation where you might have some bloatware pre-configured on the drive. Some sellers like to add their own antivirus programs, Office programs, optimizer tools, their own web browsers, and other apps considered bloatware. So it may not be harmful, but at the same time, you're probably not going to want these pre-configured apps if you don't use them. All right, so drivers are most likely not going to match your hardware. So if they did their own Windows installation on some other type of computer, then it's not going to match up with your computer. So you may have to do updates for your video card, sound card, motherboard chipset, network adapters, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth adapters, and the like. And you may have a situation where the updates may be old, so this is going to depend on when they made their master image. So you may have updates that are, a few weeks old, months old, or even up to a year old. And of course, you could go through Windows Update to resolve this, but that's going to take some time on your end. All right, so when it comes to user accounts, most of the time they're not going to come with a user account already configured, but there are some exceptions. So one common way they do it is they configure it with the out-of-the-box experience mode. So this means you boot up the computer, you're going to see the Windows setup screen, choose your language and region, connect to your wireless, and then you'll create your own user account. And most likely you're going to just connect your Microsoft account to Windows since they like to use a Microsoft account. And then when this happens, there's not going to be a pre-configured account until you create one. So this is the same experience as if you're to set up a new computer out of the box or if you were to do a clean Windows installation from scratch. All right, so some of the less reputable sellers might add their own pre-configured accounts. So they might add a generic local user account and give it a name such as user, owner, administrator, and then this allows them to finish the installation and install drivers and apps. But at the same time, you're going to have someone else's pre-configured profile on the computer. The activation may behave differently if it's a local account. Some of the settings may not reset properly. They may change some of the security settings after adding this user. And then you're most likely going to have to delete this user account and create your own because you don't want some random user account on your new Windows installation. And then you might find some old traces of their user account after doing so. So you're going to need to do things such as go to the users folder on the C drive and make sure everything's wiped out from there. All right, so if you do have a situation where you have a pre-configured user, you're going to boot the drive, then you're going to log in with this seller created account. So they may set it to have no password or have it boot up with the password automatically entered, and you may not even know the password. And then you may find that this account doesn't have administrator privileges on the computer, and if that's the case, you're not going to be able to add your own account separately, and that's going to be a problem there. And then regardless, you're going to have to add your own user account and delete the old one manually. So this is usually a sign of a lower quality installation. So overall, you should look for sellers who promise no pre-created accounts, that Windows is going to start with the out-of-the-box experience. It's going to be a clean installation, and none of the Windows settings have been changed. So if it does start in the out-of-the-box experience, then you're going to be looking pretty good when it comes to tampering or installing any additional apps because you can't do that till you finish this first step here and add a user account. All right, so when it comes to cost, that's going to vary. All right, so if you do buy a preloaded SSD, you're looking at $60 to $120, depending on the drive size and the seller. If it's just a regular SATA SSD, the cost is going to vary, and obviously the size as well. It's going to determine the cost. So this will include Windows pre-installed and may or may not include a valid Windows license, so that's the biggie there. Because when you look at these lower costs, it's most likely not going to have a real Windows license because the Windows license itself can cost more than the drive. All right, so if you do it yourself, you just buy a new blank hard drive and your own license, then it's going to be cheaper depending on how you go about it. The drive itself should be cheaper. Once again, the type and size is going to determine the cost. And then you're looking at Windows license keys. So if you buy one from a third party like an OEM key, you're looking at $40 to $80. And if you get a legit retail one, $140 to $200, depending on if you're buying the home or pro version. And when it comes to these third party licenses, you need to make sure they are legitimate and not something that's been sold to 100 other people. So overall, the do-it-yourself method is going to be safer and more reliable, but these preloaded drives can cost less overall if they come with Windows on it and Windows is already activated. All right, so how do these sellers keep the price so low? So many times they won't activate Windows at all, and you'll have to do so once you start it up with your own key, or they will use a KMS activation tool, which simulates a corporate KMS server. So when this happens, it's most likely not genuine, or it could be a temporary key. It may deactivate itself later, and can also violate the Microsoft licensing term, and you may even run into a situation where it's flagged by your antivirus. And then oftentimes they will use leaked or abused corporate keys, and then if that organization notices, they will revoke those keys, and then your version of Windows will not be activated any longer. And then you might find that they install Windows and expect you to activate it. So you need to read the fine print and look for something like Windows installed, activation required. So if you're thinking that it's going to be activated and you didn't read this, then you're going to be in for a nice unfortunate surprise. And then it may be a case of they install Windows using your PC's entitlement. So if you have your OEM key that's tied to your motherboard and you install this new drive with Windows, Windows should read it from the motherboard and activate itself for the most part. So when this happens, the SSD seller isn't providing the license, your hardware is. So you need to look out for that as well and maybe figure out what type of license you have before doing this. All right, so we have our Windows activation options. So you could do the digital license method, which is the most reliable. So this is going back to the OEM key, so Windows will often activate itself after connecting online. And this could also apply to a key that is tied to your Microsoft account. So when you connect your Microsoft account to your new Windows installation, it may activate itself. And if not, you could go to your Microsoft account and find the key and do it manually. And also sometimes these SSD sellers will use a OEM license embedded into the installation, but this may not transfer to your computer when you put it in your own computer. And of course, if you have a retail license, you could enter your own key at any time, and then you should be able to find this on the Microsoft website when you log in with your account. And another way to do so is go into Windows to the Settings, System, Activation, Troubleshoot, and choose the option I changed hardware on this device, and see if you can have it activate that way. And once again, activation is never tied to the SSD, only to the hardware such as your motherboard. All right, so how does activation behave on new hardware? So when you boot up with the preloaded SSD on your computer, Windows detects the new hardware. It may reinstall drivers, may require reactivation, and then you may see a message saying Windows is not activated on the desktop, and then you'll have to go through and activate it with your actual key. Or of course you could use Windows without it being activated. There'll just be certain things you can't do, like change the personalization options, and you'll have to have that message on your desktop. All right, so you may find some other apps pre-configured on these hard drives, such as an Office trial, web browsers, utilities like WinRAR, WinZip, 7-Zip, media players, antivirus trials, cloning software. And if this is stuff you don't want to use, obviously you're going to have to uninstall it. So that's going to be up to you. And then when it comes to Windows updates, security patches may be outdated. Feature updates might be behind, such as it came with 23H2 instead of 24H2 or 25H2. So you're going to have to do major updates there. Your Microsoft Defender definitions will probably be outdated. You might have to update other drivers. So you're going to have to plan on taking some time to make sure all these Windows updates and driver updates are completed. All right, so some common drive and partition formats for these drives. So once again, depending on how much you want to spend, what type of drive you want to get, and what is supported for your computer, it's going to determine the cost here and what type you're going to get. Of course, we have the 2.5-inch SATA SSDs, which should be compatible with pretty much any computer because you should have multiple SATA ports on your motherboard. And then we have the M.2 SATA SSDs for M.2 slots. And then we have the M.2 NVMe SSDs, which are the fastest choice here and also the most expensive. All right, when it comes to partitioning, most sellers should use GPT partition styles with UEFI boot mode, especially for Windows 11. And then when it comes to the partition scheme on the new drive, you're going to have all the typical partitions such as your primary drive for Windows, EFI system partition, Microsoft reserve partition, and your recovery partition. And then you may find that older systems may require MBR, but these days you're probably not going to be running into that. All right, so the final verdict here for preloaded Windows SSD. So they can be a fast, convenient solution if you're just repairing a broken PC. You want a beginner-friendly upgrade. You need to get your computer up and running immediately, and you're okay with potential activation steps. So some things you might run into, of course, is that activation is not guaranteed. The installation may not be perfectly clean. You're going to have some older updates. You may have the problem with the extra user accounts, and then you don't know where these installation sources came from. So overall, if you want 100% reliability and long-term safety, you should install Windows yourself using things like the Microsoft official media creation tool or other tools such as Rufus. But of course, this is up to you, but I will say definitely do your research, read reviews, and that type of thing before buying one of these pre-configured drives. All right, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe.